This wasn't a lesson or a reprimand of some sort. It was a confirmation ritual, a diagnostic carried out by elders who already suspected the result. Toji knelt on the cold wooden floor while several members of his clan stood around him in what looked like an empty room. Except it wasn't at all, because a cursed spirit had been deliberately brought there, restrained by methods he couldn't perceive, its presence heavy enough that everyone else in the room reacted to it instinctively, their attention locking onto the same point, and Toji stared exactly where he was told to look, focused until his eyes ached, because the others were clearly seeing something, and still there was nothing for him, not even the vague sense that something occupied the space. This was the anomaly they had suspected, the impossible result they needed verified, that a Zenin child born without cursed energy wasn't merely weak, but fundamentally repulsive, unable to perceive a cursed spirit even when it stood directly in front of him. That confirmation settled over the room heavier than the curse itself, reminding them of months of training sessions where instructions had never made sense to him, through sudden shouts and reactions to threats he couldn't see, conversations that stopped when he approached, and looks that lingered just long enough to register him as wrong. And while it took Toji time to understand the implications of that absence, his mother understood immediately, because she had lived long enough inside the Zenin clan to know exactly what happened to children who couldn't contribute, who couldn't fight, who couldn't even see the enemy they were born to face. And she understood that her son's life here had already been decided, that his future would be shaped entirely by that. And she couldn't endure that knowledge. So in the spring, when the estate was drowned in pale pink blossoms, she tied a rope to the old tree and herself beneath it on a day that was otherwise unremarkable. And Toji found her that same afternoon, a child of 6, her body swaying almost gently as petals fell around her. And he stood there for a long time, without crying or screaming or understanding the reasons, only looking. The branches, the way her feet didn't quite touch the ground, until a voice from behind him cut through the stillness, telling someone to clear that up because it spoiled the view. Another voice agreeing with mild irritation, and that observation lodged itself into Toji's mind more firmly than grief ever did. The idea that she was in the way, that she was blocking the flowers, did stick with him for a long time. He couldn't help but agree. He wasn't moved or shocked by it, maybe because he had already been worn down by months of quiet disappointment and casual cruelty, or maybe because it had never existed to begin with, and time moved without ceremony after that. Days spent training alongside cousins and people he couldn't care to remember, whose disgust for him was barely concealed. Months where instructors noticed in quiet glances that even stripped of cursed energy, his body behaved strangely, absorbing hits that should have broken him by now. And while this never earned praise, it earned attention of a colder kind, the recognition of an anomaly that couldn't be ignored. One day, the routines changed entirely, and he was no longer training toward anything the others were meant to become. And as he was led through parts of the estate he didn't recognize, down staircases that went lower than the training halls, the air colder and heavier the farther they went, Toji didn't realize that the evaluation had already finished, that the clan had already decided what he was, and that what came next wasn't training, but simply where someone like him was placed. What followed was simple, because once he was placed below the estate, the routine reduced itself to repetition, to being taken down into the same stone chamber again and again. The elders stacking cursed spirits through the space with deliberate intent, each one real and visible to them, even as Toji saw nothing at all. only felt the pressure shift when the hit registered, only felt the air grow heavier before the impact. And the first time it happened, he had no context for it, no warning, only the sudden sensation of being struck the ground and thrown hard enough to knock the air out of his lungs, slammed into stone before he could stand, struck again and again, pain arriving in overlapping waves that left no room to separate one injury from the next. And above it all, there were voices, watching from beyond the chamber, commenting with detached interest. Because that was the purpose of this placement, to determine the limits of a body without cursed energy, to see whether durability alone could substitute for power. And when he finally lost consciousness, it wasn't because they stopped, but because his mind shut itself down when his body refused to. And after that, there was nothing, only a stretch of time. And when awareness returned, it did so abruptly to a body that no longer felt like a child's, lying in a recovery room he didn't recognize, wrapped in bandages that fit an adult frame. Years had passed. Woke up in a body that had been built by the same process that put him there, the same chamber, the same cursed spirits. And the realization settled quietly that nothing had changed during that time, that the training hadn't escalated or changed purpose. The same evaluation was still ongoing, the cycle continuing with minor variations, different cursed spirits, different methods, the same result. Because no matter how severe the injuries were, his body repaired itself enough to survive. And it didn't take long for the elders to notice that this wasn't by chance. And once that realization set in, the sessions shifted from observation to escalation. The cursed spirits grade got higher, and through all of it, Toji stopped asking why, and focused instead on enduring each session as it came. Because survival required everything. And even when he rasped out that he couldn't curse anything because he had no cursed energy, that was the very reason he was there. And so the chamber remained his place in the clan, not as training, but as a way for him to meet his end, but as the role assigned to someone whose only remaining value was how much damage he could absorb before finally breaking. Even without cursed energy, his muscles moved with a precision that hadn't been taught. While he still couldn't see the curses, he no longer needed to, because he could feel them clearly now, as shapes and forms and changes in pressure, disturbances that preceded movement. And through repetition, he learned patterns, learned where attacks came from and how to move just enough to avoid the worst of them. So they brought stronger curses, more aggressive. The sessions lengthened, the recovery periods shortened, and still he survived. Toji understood then that this place wasn't meant to end, that there was no point where he would be deemed sufficient or finished, that as long as he lived, he would continue to be used this way. And that realization didn't anger him. It settled slowly, like a fact that couldn't be argued with. Because if there was no finish line and no reward waiting at the end of this, then the only thing left to decide was what he would do with the body that refused to die and the time that kept accumulating around it. And sometime after that, lying alone in the middle of a session, his thoughts turned to his mother without warning, not to how she died, but to what she had done. And the conclusion came to him plainly that she was in hell. She chose to bring a child into a place like this and then abandon him inside it. Because whatever fear or pain she felt didn't erase the fact that she left him here to deal with the rest alone. But even so, she was free, and that was the part that mattered. Because she had escaped this place in the only way available to her, while he was still here, still breathing, because his body refused to give out. And once that settled, the idea of dying stopped being useful altogether, because even that wasn't something his body would allow. There was no place for him here, and that was exactly why this kept happening. Because if his body wasn't going to fail, then the only thing left to change was the state of the cursed spirits they kept sending in. The air settled differently once it was done, and that alone was enough to tell the voices above that whatever rule had kept the balance tilted had finally cracked. Because up until that point, every session had ended the same way, but this time, the chamber was a place where something else was being broken. And the only question left wasn't whether he would last, but how long it would take before the people watching understand that the thing they were trying to kill had already become the most dangerous thing in the room. At some point, the idea was voiced out loud whether he planned to do it too, whether he was going to string himself up the same way his mother had. And Toji didn't react right away, because the answer was already obvious to him. Even if he tried, even if he chose that exit, with a body like his, even wouldn't finish the job. Death wasn't something easily available to him. Not here. Not like that. That it would be a waste to end things quietly, a waste to disappear now. Because if he was going to leave this place, it wouldn't be by failing inside it. It would be by wreaking some havoc. And the idea of raising a little hell before going out felt like the only reasonable option left. And standing there with nothing pressing him forward and nothing holding him back, because now that he understood his own strength, the only thing left was choice. And for the first time since this story began, that choice belonged entirely to him.